We have on the stage, ladies and gentlemen, speakers from earlier in the program, Captain Kitagawa Keizo, Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, Captain retired from the USN Peter Haynes, the author of a cutting-edge book on the nature of maritime doctrine and strategy. We have Glaser, who delivered a highly authoritative luncheon address yesterday. I'm just waiting for our colleague, pardon me, Dr. An from Hanoi. Hopefully she'll be here momentarily. But before she arrives, let me then begin by posing a question to all of the panelists. We've had, I think I can say without any modesty, a rich and varied array of discussions over the past 2 days. And I'd like to begin with a very broad and generalized question, and that's that what do you, as practitioners and analysts, see as the biggest threat to Seapower in the region going forward? What is the biggest challenge that we're likely to face? Perhaps I could begin with Captain Kitagawa Keizo, please. And I believe there's a microphone to hand there.
Thank you, Dr. Budgetary. First of all, I think this conference, it should be in by the last session. Future Leaders Forum. Yes, but I think we all think we are still young, so let us continue. And I was very honored to be appointed to this role. And I was heard from the Dr. Boutilier that, oh, you don't have to prepare anything. So this question, we just heard right now. So I think you and I are in the same shoes. Okay, so the question is, what do you practitioners, biggest threat and challenge?
What do you see as the greatest threat, challenge rather, into Pacific Seapower going forward?
Good question, sir. Okay, let me begin with, I think, first of all, three things I would say. First thing, the threat and challenge. First, like I said in the presentation, the rule of law and for the open seas. As past 3 days, that we have realized that it is important to talk on the background of same condition and understanding. Otherwise, it's very difficult to communicate. So we had the WPNS had a Qs or like this kind of forum. I think we have to make efforts to have that communication going. That's a challenge one. And second hand, I would say, this is my profession, the increase of the maritime hegemony, so to speak. I think this area, for example, I don't know the exact number. For example, the submarines. I think in a couple of years, we have like more than 100 submarines in Indo-Asia-Pacific region, which is far more than the other part of the world. So that means if we increase this hard power, which is unavoidable, because if the country gets rich, obviously you want to have the hard power. That is the history shows, that modern Japan shows in the 19th century. So it is unavoidable, but that means the possibility of friction, the possibility of confrontation may rise. So that's going to be a challenge. And third point would be, I should say, economy and the environment. It is like my country, the Navy does only naval things. We have Coast Guard and Fishery Agency and so forth. But obviously, the economy relates to the defense. And particularly, we see in the Day 1 panel about resource, particularly this region, fisheries, and resource of the crude oil and minerals. So that is also a challenge because the oceans, like in the Navy, we connect all three dimensions, air and the surface, subsurface. And I think this resource thing is also related. So come to a conclusion, I think to meet that challenge, we need this kind of dialogue and continuous discussion to understand each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Peter?
From what I heard, his question is about challenges and...
Forgive me. The question that was posed while you were coming into the ballroom was, what do you see as the most pressing maritime security challenge going forward in terms of Pacific Sea Powers? So if you'd like to address that, please do, or otherwise wait for Peter and then you can collect your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And as Keizo was talking, I was collecting my thoughts as well. I think there are, so the question is, what is the biggest threat or challenge? From a pragmatist standpoint, I'll define it, and then I'll define the context why. I think, and I agree with everything Keizo said as well, but I think the biggest threat or challenge is really a very narrow understanding of the threat and a very narrow and martial understanding of the challenge. So when you define the threat in threat terms, and in state or non-state terms, and not in terms of the economy, of the infrastructure on world trade moves and the information infrastructure as well, then you will narrow that down. You will narrow the ends down, and then you will narrow down the ways and means. Again, as I said a couple of days ago, the types of problems that naval officers like to find and solve best are tactical and technological. We tend not to start out with the broad strategic ends, and instead we try to work our way up from the tactical to the operational to the strategic. But what is the context behind all that? Well, the context is much like it was in the last era of globalization. We are dealing with an expansion in the threats, and not just in terms of state and non-state. We are dealing with an expansion of the playing fields of great power competition. We are dealing with an expansion in the modes of competition, an expansion in the modes of conflict. And how do you mitigate those crises? How do you mitigate the confrontations? How do you mitigate the crisis? How do you manage that? And then how do you attempt to gain consensus among particularly your allies and trading partners? And we had a conversation a couple days ago about the Cold War. Arriving at a consensus during the Cold War was fairly easy, comparatively. Back then it was very difficult, but it is comparatively easier than it is now. And arriving at the consensus will be very difficult. And again, you have to be able to think in systemic terms first, and then put the threat thinking within that context as well. Because, for example, the First World War essentially brought down the system, the world's economic, political system, and we had to rebuild that after World War II. So deterring and managing great power conflict and competition, I think, contextually is the biggest threat. And I think in terms of how we apply maritime and naval power, I think the biggest threat is a very narrow understanding of that threat and of the other related challenges.
Would you suggest, Peter, that overarching this is a potential collision between two fundamentally different value systems? Between the rules-based and rules-based system and a system which is challenging the rules-based system?
Yes, but we've seen that through history. That the rising hegemon and globalization essentially creates rising hegemons. And United States, Germany, and Russia were the rising hegemons at the turn of the last century, and we rode on the ability of the British to manage the system as well. And I keep harking back a lot to the First World War because how they managed it. Essentially, world leaders were unable to understand and manage the consequences of globalization. And yes, there were a lot of tactical and operational causes for that. And essentially, terrorism in the name of nationalism kicked off the war, but at its core, it was the aspirations of which globalization feeds, the aspirations of rising powers. So yes, very definitely there is a tension there, and there historically has always been that kind of tension when the status quo hegemon and the rising hegemons have to learn to live with each other and manage relations.
So, a few days, is this on? Yes. So
Yes, I think so.
I was reading a few days ago, Secretary Clinton did an interview, and she was actually given questions in advance. So I just want to say, we didn't get any of these questions in advance, unlike your young leaders, we didn't get this in advance. I'm going to focus in my response in the area of the world that I really pay most attention to, and that's East Asia. And I think the first biggest challenge is sovereignty issues, where we have both in the East China Sea, South China Sea to some extent, and in the Yellow Sea, disputes over its sovereignty that are really not easily solvable. As we have seen, other than the Philippines, there are a few countries that really want to take these issues to these courts under UNCLOS. We have seen some successfully do so, and as they decided yesterday, the India-Bangladesh being a good example. But I think in the South China Sea and East China Sea, we're just not going to see international law resolve those sovereignty disputes. And it would be best if everybody accepted the status quo. It would be quite a threat to the region if there were a use of force to dislodge anybody who is occupying any of the existing islands. So I think managing these sovereignty disputes is very challenging. The second that comes to mind is maintaining access. And it will be politically incorrect of me to talk about anti-access area denial, because CNO Admiral Richardson says we can't talk about A2AD anymore. But I think that for the U.S. Navy and other navies in the world, global navies, maintaining access is important. I happen to worry about this in the South China Sea. After the July 12th ruling was issued by the arbitral tribunal, the Chinese government issued a very unusual, authoritative government statement that talked about China's claims to territorial seas, EEZs, continental shelves, and internal sea. And the Chinese have already drawn straight baselines in the paracels where they claim an internal sea, and I believe we are likely to see this in the scrappies as well. So I think maintaining access to international waters will be challenging potentially in the future. And then the third that I would mention, again in the area that I geographically focus on most in East Asia, was talked about yesterday. And that is the lack of adherence to rules. And I won't say lack of rules, it's lack of adherence to rules between maritime law enforcement and white-hulled ships, government ships, among themselves, and then of course with fishing boats. And everybody talked about queues yesterday. Nobody mentioned the collision regulations. You know, there's cold regs happens to provide quite clear circumstances and ways in which ships are supposed to avoid collisions. The U.S. and Chinese Coast Guard are now engaged in discussions on creating two new MOUs, one on cooperation and the other that is focused on avoiding collision. And I think because the U.S. Coast Guard really limited to operations mostly around Guam and the North Pacific, we're not in the South China Sea. The U.S. really sees this as a template, potentially, for other governments. So China and Japan, for example, to apply in the East China Sea, and then, of course, the claimants in the South China Sea. And some of the data that I have collected, I have a website called Chinapower, and one of the features on the website that we just did recently is on we put together data from 2010 to 2016 on incidents, or major incidents between maritime law enforcement ships, and found that, probably not surprisingly, China is involved in 71% of those. And there are instances, of course, which others are involved. There was the Filipino shooting, for example, of a Taiwanese fisherman. And so I think that to adhering to the rules that exist, whether it's cues, code regs, international signals, for example, this is something that is challenging going forward, because I think the laws, the norms, the rules exist, but they're not being applied in the future.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but cues was in many ways the jewel in the crown in the WPNS meeting in Qingdao in 2010. But it's only voluntary, as I understand it. So, in fact, it doesn't necessarily oblige the various commanding officers to subscribe to or to observe cues. So we talk about it, but I think that's a fundamental structural weakness in the cues regime. And could I turn to Dr. An, please? Your assessment of what you see as the sort of most pressing maritime security issue.
For us, obviously, the maritime strategic environment have now facing with both traditional and non-traditional maritime threat. From the traditional, obviously, we have North Korea, we have like the possibility of port conflict in the South China Sea, in the existing of territorial maritime disputes that hasn't been resolved. But for non-traditional maritime security threats, we have a lot of issues that have been mentioned by the other panelists. And that two big threats raise on the issue, the big issue of capacity. Because for Vietnam, and I'm assured that for any other country in the world, that no one can handle that big issue alone. And for capacity, I agree with Bonnie that the big issue for example, traditional maritime threat is how to manage it. Because we see that for current situation, without the willingness and the consent of all the parties concerned, we cannot settle the territorial dispute. So as long as we cannot settle, we need to live with it. But we need to find a way to live with it healthily. So that's why we need to find a mechanism to control and manage. But so far, the most important, I also agree with Bonnie that the most important is status quo. But what kind of status quo that everyone stick to? We are talking about the status quo, for example, for the South China Sea in 2002, when the DOC has been issued, that one kind of status quo. But now the status quo has changed. Shall we go back to the status quo of 2002, or accept the current status quo? So it is not an easy issue. And the next point is that in order to manage proper dispute, it's one side. But the other side that why we still accept that dispute exists, but we still need to maintain the momentum to work together, to trust each other, to cooperate. And that is really difficult things. Because on the one hand, if you let the tension go too far, you will not have the willing to work with each other anymore. And from the strategic point of view, and another challenge that is a power shift. And whether maritime security architecture, the new one, have evolved, have emerged, and what kind of new architecture is this? What is the role of the big power, as well as what is the influence to the medium and the small power? In that context, it's also raised another issue, because when we're talking about architectures, we are talking also about the rule. Whether we have everyone talking about the rule-based order, whether there is only one or there are many. I assume that there are only one rule-based order, and everyone talking about rule-based order, so it must be different interpretation of rule-based order with different parties. For example, China, we are all talking with the assumption that China is the one who will not believe on rule-based order. It's wrong. Because I cannot find any statement from China that China will not adhere to the rule-based order. China always say that they will support the rule-based order. They will have the peaceful rights. The matter here is that what China interprets the rule-based order perhaps slightly different from others. So how to harmonize the differences in interpreting rule-based order is another difficult issue. And also, the rule-based order is not perfect. There's some called gray zone. And the gray zone is a technical term that we can emphasize for like military issues or maritime issues. What kind of category we put them in? What kind of reaction from the rule-based order toward that kind of force? Normally navies, okay, in categories that the use of force. Law enforcement, we have the law of national country to regulate what kind of maritime issue, whether it contributes to the use of force if that force is involved. So, beyond that, the gray zone in international law is also related to the mechanism of enforcement. We all know that we are talking about rule-based order, but how can we enforce that? We have the ruling of an international tribunal, but what if someone just walk away and say that it's not binding? So the whole system of rule-based order is still like a kind of effective tool to manage and to enforce what we believe that is the correct rule-based order. So within that, a lot of challenges. Of course, the only answer is still we only have one: cooperation, sharing values more and more, try to reach consensus with each other. And how to do that? We need leaders. We need the like-minded nations working together. And you need to make the consensus greater and greater together. And we try to narrow the parts that we have differences. So in the only way, but it's easy to talk than to do. And perhaps, I don't think that big thing will work. Perhaps we must start with a small step together. Start with the part that everyone feels comfortable to work with. So for example, with China, because Vietnam is neighbor of China for many years, and we don't think that there is any space in the world that we can change our home. So we need to live with the fact that we have a big country, a rising country, and the rise of China is definitely good for Vietnam and good for the world. So there's no anti-feeling on the rise of China. But just how to persuade to be big power in the world, to be highly responsible in the way that we believe that it should be. It's all a matter of how to show China that it is necessary to do it this way. And for example, Vietnam, we start with the way that maintain negotiation mechanism. I just would like to give an example that during the oil incident, it is an incident that is shocking for us because it happened at the time that the relationship between the two really good, and it immediately turned sour, the relationship. But then because of one of the normal negotiation mechanism on the other issues, the high-ranking leaders managed to talk with each other, and then later on we work out. And now we reach a new normal of the relationship between the two, but it's better than the cold relationships. So sometimes we have to talk, maintain the momentum of negotiation, even though we know that no short-term or long-term solution can be reached. But the way that we still can talk with each other and still meet with each other means something. And perhaps we need patience as well.
Well, one of the features of the region, self-evidently, has been the steady growth in regional navies in terms of their size, their sophistication, and so forth. You can see that Vietnam, for example, has acquired number of submarines from Russia, presumably to render overall calculations in the South China Sea somewhat more challenging and complex. Would you say that the steady rise in the number of platforms and assets has contributed to greater stability, or has in fact undermined stability as we go forward in the region? Do you have a feeling of what that, Bonnie?
Well, I believe that the development of capacities of countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, to defend themselves, to have maritime domain awareness, to know what's going on inside their exclusive economic zone, that will deter other countries from taking actions that could threaten them. This is one of the capacity issues and challenges that we face. So development of those kind of capabilities, which includes ISR, it certainly includes better Coast Guard, law enforcement ships. After all, one of the reasons that the Philippines used the Gregorio del Pilar in 2012 was because they needed to have a substantial Coast Guard, and it was close by. So, and that, from China's perspective, was the trigger of the incident, because the Philippines had introduced Greyhound ships. So having the capacity for maritime law enforcement and maritime domain awareness, I think, is particularly important in the South China Sea. Now, development of more force projection capabilities, that is potentially threatening. And so we know, for example, on the 3 of the 7 islands that China has built in the Spratlys, that there are 24 hardened aircraft shelters on each one of them. There have been no aircraft deployed yet. We see radars, we see potential places for SAM deployments. We know what China has deployed on Woody Island in the Paracels, and I think many people see that as a potential model of what China might do in the Spratlys, and that kind of deployment is going to be threatening. The fact that there are deep harbors, of course, that will enable Chinese ships, not only aircraft, but to operate out there. So it's a mixed picture. It depends on the kind of deployments, but I'll let my Vietnamese colleague talk about the acquisition by Vietnam of kilos, for example. There's been what some people would refer to as an arms race, and I don't like that phrase myself. But growing concerns about threats have certainly driven countries to acquire more capabilities.
Yes, I think Des Ball in Australia would suggest that we've moved beyond mere modernization or expansion to the point of action, reaction, acquisition of assets, that what's happening in one Navy is driving what's happening in another. I would suggest, with respect that perhaps we should refer to it not as an island, but a geographic feature, in the sense that my understanding is that a submerged shoal, even if it's built up into a dramatic installation, is still, in fact, under UNCLOS a geographic feature.
Some were originally submerged. In the case of Fire Cross, for example, that was originally a rock. So now it's just a lot bigger.
Please.
The question Jim raised is very important. I think we are facing dilemma. Of course, the best word is that we all reduce military expenditure, so we're all happy except the military weapons producers. But it is actually the story that the admirer from Malaysia shared with us yesterday. So, why the war is peace? Why you enroll into the Navy? Because your answer is that because you enroll in the Navy, then the war is peace. So, we have military building up because we lack trust. We feel insecure. That's why we need to have certain deterrence. We have certain capacity to self-defense when you feel necessary. But then, of course, when you build up your military, then your neighboring also feel insecure. So it is a dominoes impacts. And of course, to some extent, the war will not be stable with that arm race, I have to say. But then, if you look at the other angle, if we have the capacity to defend yourself, that we can create power balance, and that contributes to stability. Because instability and war will occur when we have room for imbalance, we have the weakness point, and if everyone strong can defend themselves, then we have a balance. That balance is not good as no one has power and invest all the resources to economy, to development, of course. But then it's still a good balance in the way that it's secure peace.
Keizo-san, what is your assessment, because you're now living in an increasingly challenging and even brittle maritime realm in Northeast Asia?
Yes, Dr. Woody, for your question, this is totally a personal opinion, but I think your question concerning the rise of Navy, I think it can contribute to the stability in terms of the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, because if you compare what's going on in East China Sea, in South China Sea, it's very obvious. In East China Sea, we have Japan has one of the most sophisticated defense force in the world in terms of maritime and air, and also like our ally, like Koreans, they have also the advanced defense force, and both countries are strong alliance with the United States, and that kind of shows, obviously, it's a balance of power. So, and also Japan has a very strong coast guard. And now we are, I think we cannot deny that strong force is kind of getting the balance power. On the other hand, South China Sea, for example, particularly Japan is lending a hand to Philippines and Vietnam because it is obvious it is our interest, because our serial communication extends to the Europe and then Middle East, all goes through the South China Sea. But on the other hand, unfortunately, these countries, players in South China Sea, are now growing. Now, like I don't kind of say, it's a growing. So having said that, these kind of balance power in terms of necessary. And next step needs some kind of control, but I think this kind of forum is important to understand how we do the communication and then do the procedures, not to miscalculate each other. So that is my second point.
Some years ago, Commodore Sam Bateman, Royal Australian Navy retired, welcomed the growth of Coast Guards in the region on the grounds that these were inherently less provocative than gray hulls, and that this would contribute to the overall regional stability. But it strikes me that in practice, some of the distinctions between gray and white, and perhaps light blue in the case of the militias, has been blurred. And I'd welcome your observations, Peter, on this changing landscape.
Thanks, Jennifer. Allow me to go last there so I can collect my thoughts, because these aren't easy questions. No, I want to piggyback in your last comment. Essentially what we're seeing in East Asia, for example, is a spread of capabilities across the three roles of navies, military, diplomatic, and constabulary. And I think on the constabulary side, we're seeing, like you said, more Coast Guards, more law enforcement. And on the military side, it's interesting as well. We are now moving out of particularly the U.S. Navy is moving out of the 1990s, where we had an expansion of threats terrorism, everything else that we had to design our weapon systems around. And now that is moving back towards great power conflict, for example. And I think what you're seeing with a lot of the nations in East Asia, particularly with submarines, is reorienting back towards the military side. In other words, a guided missile destroyer can do all three of those functions, military, diplomatic, and constabulary. It is very difficult for a submarine to do all three of those, and it's really more designed on the sea control aspects of the military dimension. So what you're seeing on the whole is a spread of capabilities across those three roles. And it's particularly difficult for the United States Navy because we tend not to focus on constabulary. We tend not to design our weapon systems for constabulary duties, although I think that's what the LCS may end up doing, just because of its narrow capabilities or so. And I think it also should be said that a lot of the tension, a lot of the conflicts, a lot of the we need these kind of capabilities is essentially following in the footprints of our economic interests. East Asia is the locus of the world economy, and the South China Seas is the locus of that in that as well. And what you're seeing is a very interesting dynamic. And I would agree with Bonnie that I don't see it as an arms race per se because it's not particularly symmetrical at this point. And I want to say asymmetrical because it's almost like relations, but folks are designing navies for different reasons. That was not the case in the lead up to the First World War, for example.
But would you suggest that India and China are in fact acquiring assets more or less reactively in terms of growth of carriers or submarine capability?
I think it's reactive, but I think I think if you look at their documents, it's not. There's more domestic considerations there that we know less about, and we tend to adhere to the more reactive because we tend to see that in a much more familiar light. For example.
I've had the great pleasure of engaging the panel, but let me invite a speaker or two from the floor to pose a question or provide commentary which relates to the issues that we've just addressed. I'll take these two speakers, please.
Just would like to make a comment.
Pardon me, Alexander, I'm not sure that that microphone is working.
So I just would like
you are now connected.
Just would like to make a comment. Going against.
I'll have to ask you to speak a little closer. Thank you.
Okay. Speaking again, preconceived ideas. Actually, the number of submarines in the Indo-Pacific area has decreased since the end of the Cold War because of the decrease of the Southern Russian order of battle of submarines. So actually, the number has gone down, and even the Chinese number went slightly down also. But of course, the number of honors has decreased. As to the reactions, yes, I do think that there is a phenomenon, especially if you look at the submarines. When Singapore purchased its submarines, it had an effect on the neighbors, I believe, an effect on Malaysia, an effect, Indonesia, of course, already had submarines. But I think it played, and I think often the China argument is used, although it is also a concern, obviously, for Malaysia, as we know. But regarding the aircraft carrier, it is interesting to note that India has indicated that it would build another aircraft carrier as a consequence of the news that China is building right now an aircraft carrier in Dalian. So that's a reply to that point. And regarding the historical comments that were made at the beginning, I read recently in a Chinese article about Seapower and how China should draw lessons from the past. That China was looking at the way the United States and Germany tried to dislodge the British Navy from the top position. And they were saying that the Germans had done it very badly and that the United States had done it just the right way. So Germany had instilled fear in Britain at the beginning of the 20th century, and causing Britain to concentrate its forces in the Atlantic, as we know. And in the case of the United States, the transition appeared extremely smooth during the First World War, and with, as we know, the 1922 Washington Treaty that accepted the parity between the two powers. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, please.
Good morning. Captain Carl Woodhead, Assistant Chief of Navy Strategy from the Royal New Zealand Navy. My question arises both from the Future Leaders presentation we had and from this last discussion. In the Future Leaders presentation, we heard about elements of sea power, and one of those that was put forward that each nation could develop was education and training to lead to meaningful employment in maritime industries. Now, if we correlate economic power and economic prosperity, perhaps with sea power and maritime security, we actually see from economic theory that we wouldn't necessarily all want to build our own maritime industries and have meaningful employment. We would actually want to trade, and those that have comparative advantage in providing, say, manpower to merchant marines like the Philippines should do that, and those that can't compete in that area shouldn't, but it's for the benefit of all. And so I guess my question really is, how much is maritime security dependent on competition for sea power, and how much is maritime security really about a sea power trading system where we each find a niche and can trade and create more maritime security for all? Is it time for some sort of global maritime security or sea power strategy? And if we look at the economics, and I think of what you mentioned, Bonnie, about the TPP yesterday, are we talking about the possibility of a TPP equivalent for sea power or maritime security writ large, or is that just plainly naive?
Let me invite Senior Captain Jean to make a comment, and then I'll turn it over to the panel to respond to those observations and questions. Please.
Thank you, Jim. I'm very glad to be here. This week, 2 days, 3 days, I can see that China has become a focus. I'm glad to be here to exchange my ideas with my friends here.
Could you speak a little closer to the microphone,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to exchange my ideas with my friends. I have 3 comments and 3 questions for my friends platform. Firstly, for Bonnie. I think you saying about the military deployment on the Shisha Islands, which is called Paracel Islands. You say it's threatening peace and stability. I don't agree with you. Because we think that Shisha Island is totally different from the Nansha Island, the Spratly Islands. We think there is no dispute with other countries, including the Vietnamese. You are talking, and other people are talking about the state of quo in the South China Sea. The state of quo in the Shisha Island, the Paracel Island, is that China occupies the Shisha, the Paracel Islands. If you are respecting the state of quo, not change the state of quo, you should respect the occupation of China on the Paracel. You should not support the Vietnamese to make claims on the sovereignty of the Shisha Islands. So you are actually taking a double standard, including the Vietnamese. You all are talking about maintaining state of quo in this area. So this is my question. Don't you think it is a double standard you are taking? Actually, I want to add one more. For several decades, Chinese have been deploying weapons on the Shisha Island, on the Paracel. It's not a new thing. So we don't think it is the same as the Spratly Island. Is my comment and question. My second question and comment is about on the comments of the lady from Vietnam. I don't agree with you to single out China to be different for the rule-based order, from the rule-based order. China actually is acting, to my own perspective, is better than Vietnam. For example, for the queues, China and the United States Navy, together with other navies, are strong supporter and we push forward the approval of the queues. And the Chinese Navy has practiced much more times than the Vietnamese Navy with other navies, including the United States Navy and other navies. Even we have differences with the United States on some policies, but our two navies conducted queues every time we met. So I think China is a strong supporter of the rule-based order. This is my comment, and I ask no question. Don't you think so? My third comment and question is for my Japanese friend. You are always talking about the sea lanes, the safety of the security of the sea lanes of the Japanese as a reason you want to get involved or you want to interfere in the South China Sea issue. But we have seen that the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea has never been a problem. The freedom, especially the merchant vessels, has never been affected. No one country has complained about the freedom of the vessels, merchant vessels. So to the Chinese and to my opinion, Japanese are trying to get an excuse to meddle in the South China Sea, to use the freedom of navigation as an excuse to meddle. You are actually supporting some countries in their provocations against China. Don't you think so? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senior Captain Zhang. We have had a perfect illustration of some of the challenges of differing worldviews. So might I turn it over to the panel to address that. I believe perhaps Bonnie, you're the first up, and then we'll go to An and then to Keizo-san.
Well, thank you for the question, Senior Captain Zhang. First, I would say that you implied that the United States supports Vietnam's claim to the paracels, and I think it's pretty clear that the United States doesn't take a position on sovereignty anywhere in these disputed waters, but has identified a series of interests, including peaceful resolution of these disputes, as well as freedom of navigation. Obviously, the U.S. and China define freedom of navigation a little bit differently, and China does focus on the commercial aspect, and I would agree that China doesn't have an interest in blocking or interfering with freedom of navigation for commercial vessels. But there is still really, freedom of navigation, to my mind, is primarily a military concept in any case. And there are issues with both aircraft and ships that have come near some of these geographically expanded features where China has declared that these are somehow military alert zones, not a concept in UNCLOS that I know of, and warned operators, not only from the United States, but from other nations from getting too close. And so freedom of navigation, I think, is a potential issue. So back to the paracels, I would simply add that they are in fact disputed between China and Vietnam. My Japanese colleague will, you'll forgive me for drawing an analogy that, that Senkaku's, Diaoyu, they're disputed between Japan and China. This is a fact. So even though governments deny that areas are disputed, these disputes exist. But I think from my personal point of view, and obviously I don't represent anybody from the U.S. government, my comment on preservation of the status quo is simply that is, in my view, really the only way forward. I don't think any government is going to give up what it occupies. And so countries can continue to have their claims, but for the time being, I think we need to focus on how to manage these disputes. And I would guess you would at least agree with me on that point. Thank you.
On the matter of the rule of law, I have to frankly say before that I couldn't find any statement for China to say that China will not adhere to the rule of law. Of course, you do as us as well, but just name as a few, the way of interpreting the rule of law between China and the other is slightly different. For example, in the case between China and the Philippines, China believes that it is bringing a case before arbitration is a hostile activities, whereas I think in accordance with rule-based order, we believe that dispute settlement, including third-party judicial dispute settlement. For example, on the matter of the parasol, we believe that as long as the two parties have competing claims, there is a dispute under international law, but when China mentioned that Vietnam have no right to claim, it's a different interpretation under the rule-based order. So just name a few between us, there's no disagreement on the rule of rule-based order, but we do have disagreement on the way to interpret the rule and apply the rule in the context to settle the differences between us. So the matter here that we're not trying to argue who's gonna always rule-based order than the other. It's a matter of how to narrow down the differences is the more important, because we all agree in principle, and that's good. But the details is also important in implementing the rules-based and the principle of rule-based order. So that is the thing we need to work out. And I also agree with you that in order to work out the differences, there are many ways. And we all agree that negotiation and maintaining dialogue is one of the important ways. But we never ruled out the other possibility, including the third-party facilitation to settlement a dispute if we really need it.
Well, I'm going to make comments comprehensively for all these questions in 4 points. First point is about Professor Alexander's submarine issue. I think as a naval officer, as a profession, submarine does not operate by itself. It's a part of the older system. So, for example, for my Navy, if you operate submarine, you need the surface ships to operate together, or surface ship to rescue in case of accident, and also we need maritime patrol aircraft to protect. So that means all these, our neighbors, increased submarines means increasing all these systems. I think that's my understanding, and I think all these participants in this uniform understands this. So that's why during Cold War, after the Cold War, yes, I clearly remember I joined my Navy by the end of the Cold War, but I clearly remember the Soviet Navy or Russian navies, they're scrapping the submarines and so forth. But history changes. That's the first aspect. The second point about the Carol's question about like DPP equivalent. I think I think we learn from history, and I think many things can be learned from the mistake from Japan did. During World War I, Japan was in the size of like US, UK, because we had Anglo-Japanese alliance, which I served in the UK past 3 years, from 1902 to 1927. On the other hand, personally, I think we chose the wrong partner. We have German participants in that person, so I should say it. But the thing about Japan is I think Japan challenged the old system, because Japan is a kind of latecomer to modernize. My ancestors didn't wear this until 1860s. We were wearing the swords or kimonos or hairs until 1860s. Even my grandmas didn't wear these Western clothes. So we were a latecomer, and from 1868 we had the rich nation, strong country. And in those days there was no IMF, there was no APEC, there is anything. It's only imperialism and colony. So I was astonished that when I was in UK, all these Commonwealths, or all these maps which UK had until 1945 or 1950s. So what I would say is you cannot push one country to one side. I think Japan, this is my perspective, Japan used the power because there is no mechanism to talk or anything. So I think we shouldn't push edge to any country. Like for example, North Korea, they're shooting a missile us every month, you know. And I think all of you cannot imagine this, but missile comes from us, like South Korea to Japan. But we have to listen to them, and we shouldn't push overboard the table. Otherwise, we're going to have a consequence in 1941 and so forth. So I think this is what we can learn from the Japanese failure in the history. In consequence, Japan has 3 billion people during the Second World War. That's my second point. And the third point is about Chinese friends about South China Sea. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a statesman. I'm just a naval officer. My understanding, for example, my Navy's just will be sending our training aircraft to the Philippines. And we're going to train the pilots in Japan. We started in Tokushima Air Base. And also, we are sending the Coast Guard ships to Vietnam. But this is, if your friends need assistance, just is assisting because we're friends. And if that meets our national interest, I think it's very natural to do it. But at the same time, we have to maintain clear intention to our neighbors. That's why we're doing it. Because particularly Philippines needs a surveillance, understand the situation. Without understanding the ISR situation, like one said, you cannot make decision making. So it's very logical that Japan rendering, and also we are rendering like air traffic control, air safety to Philippines. That is the same reason. So I think if we introduce, I think people understand. And it's interesting, when I joined the Navy nearly more than 20 years ago, I never thought of going my ships going to Southeast Asian nations because Japan was very, very careful exercising the hard power after the World War II. So we are very careful of doing things. But I think all the countries accept how Japan acts democracy and contribution peace. So I think this is the way Japan will move forward with our friends. And the final point is about what he said about dispute. This is, I'm going to switch to the official line of the Japanese government. That's for the, yes, I understand about Senkaku Islands, and it is about the discussion between mainland China and us. But it's interesting that we were told, because we have to understand all the regulation. Like when I was a commanding officer destroyer, I patrolled the East China Sea and watching Chinese vessels. But we have to obey all the rule of engagement regulations. And so having said that, it was interesting. We never thought the Senkaku Islands is a dispute because it has been ours and it will be ours. But I think it was, we lost in kind of the media or the international opinion warfare or what's not that we are avoiding and not saying anything when our friends said, oh, it's mine. But now so last couple of years we changed. And kind of we had to admit it's a dispute. It's very sad, but it's a fact. So I think we have to be very patient to make our points clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If